Welcome back, everyone, to another fabulous episode of the HealthCare Trailblazers podcast. I am excited and honored to be sitting here today with the wonderful David Meerman Scott. So David Meerman Scott is a very accomplished author, wrote over 12 books. His most popular ones are Fanocracy, I think is more recent, and a little bit before that, The New Rules of Marketing and PR. Little bit about I actually 5 years ago, when I was starting to get into healthcare and marketing, I read his book, and I was actually doing like a little synopsis of every chapter on LinkedIn. And the author himself even liked some of my posts, which I thought was really cool about you, David. So
thank you.
I've been excited to talk to you for about a year. And what I found even more interesting / entertaining was that about a year ago when we started the podcast, I reached out to David and I asked you, I said, would you come on the podcast? And you said, well, let me see if you've taken this seriously. So talk to me in a year. So every couple months I sent you an update, and here we are exactly a year later. So thanks for keeping your word, and I'm very excited to talk to you, David. Thanks so much for spending time with me.
It's my pleasure, Mendel. And what's interesting about that is so many people start podcasts and don't keep them up. You know, they do 3, 4, 5, maybe 10 episodes, and then they stop. And so frequently I get requests from people to be on their podcasts, and I'm always happy to entertain the opportunity if it makes sense for me. But I kind of refuse if it's a brand new podcast because so many of them fail. But good for you for keeping it going, and I'm good to my word, and here we are.
Yes, you are indeed. And I appreciate that. I think the key is, and I've mentioned this past, I think the key is knowing your strengths and weaknesses. If I had to do all of the editing, I knew I would not get past the second episode. So I set it up in a way where I come in, do the fun part, which is talking to you. And then thank God we have a really good team. They come in and chop it all up. So I don't have to.
Awesome.
Worry about that. So highly recommend. It's worth it. If you're going to do a podcast, do it right. Go invest in somebody. And yeah.
Well done.
But anyway, it's wonderful to see your face. So let's talk a little. I'm curious to hear. We're gonna bring the conversation directly to healthcare and your thoughts on marketing and healthcare, the unique challenges. But let's talk about you a little bit first.
Sure.
I've seen you at Tony Robbins events. You're all over the place. You're doing a ton of media. Obviously, huge successes with the book. Walk us through some of the basic stops in your career until you're standing in front of a surfboard in not Hawaii.
Standing in front of a surfboard in Boston, Massachusetts. It's where it's cold. Right, exactly. I'm a huge fan of surfing, which is why I've got a surfboard behind me. It actually, in a little more detail, it's a wooden surfboard. And I made that surfboard with a company called Grain Surfboards. Okay. And they have a factory up in York, Maine. And I found them because they have great marketing. So I just thought it was a fabulous example. And then I went up there and learned a little bit about them by chatting with them. There's only an hour's drive from where I live. And they do great marketing. They have a great website. They have a fabulous Instagram. And they are now the largest wooden surfboard company, I believe, in the world. So, marketing of anything is an art and a science, and Grain Surfboards is doing it really well. I got out of college. I thought I wanted to be a bond trader. I started working on Wall Street, found out I hated it. Okay. But what I loved was the information that the bond traders use, the screens from Dow Jones and Reuters and Bloomberg. So I worked for about 15 years in the real-time news and information business for companies like Dow Jones and Thomson Reuters. And I worked in Asia for 10 years, Hong Kong and Tokyo, but then had responsibility.
Sorry, you lived in Asia for 10 years?
Yeah, I lived in Tokyo for 7 years, Hong Kong for 2 years.
Okay.
And working in the financial information business. And then in 2002, I decided to start my own business, and I started doing a bit of consulting, but then very quickly started writing books, giving speeches. And I've focused the last 20 years of my career on the idea of helping people to understand modern marketing. And I was fortunate that I worked in the real-time financial information business when I first got out of school, because that was, a lot of that time was pre-internet, pre-web. And so I got kind of an unfair head start with electronic information by working for companies like Dow Jones and Thomson Reuters at a time when nobody knew what online information was, because the web hadn't even started yet. Then 1995 comes along. and the web browsers are readily available. Yahoo starts up, and Google, and then social media. And I already knew how all this stuff worked because of what I had been doing for my work prior to starting my own thing. So that gave me a head start to be able to write books and give speeches. And the book I think you read is called The New Rules of Marketing and PR. It originally came out in 2007, and it was the first book to really clearly articulate how marketing and public relations has changed because of the internet. It's now in the 8th edition. It's available
Wow.
in 29 languages from Albanian to Vietnamese. And so the book has done really well. And so, because of the success of that book in particular, that's allowed me to get a lot of invitations to speak all over the world. And I've delivered presentations in, I think I'm up to 46 different countries over the last 15 years about how marketing and sales works, and have appeared in over 300 podcasts. So thank you for
301.
thank you for having me on, so I can check off another fabulous podcast that I've had a chance to be a guest on.
Absolutely. That's really great. I have a question for you. So it's 2002. You start your own business and you write a book. I'm going to try to articulate this as best as possible. And it's a little different because you had 10 years behind you before you wrote that book, right? So I guess that is the answer. But I'm curious, was there a conversation with yourself where you had to kind of was it difficult to almost give yourself permission to become an authority and say, okay, because some people, they jump in before they do anything and they try to become an authority, and then they just become these false gurus. And you have other people that maybe live their whole life and they never take that step and never recognize that they've got the knowledge to be an authority. What was that journey like for you?
It was a very, very clear thing that happened to me. I realized in about 2004-ish that I was seeing patterns in the universe that nobody else was talking about. Now, I'm not going to be so bold as to say no one else saw those patterns other than me, but I was the only one talking about them. I was the only one articulating a very simple thing for me and a very complex thing for others to understand. And that's simple. That's this. Everybody in the everyone in the late 1990s and early 2000s was talking about marketing on the web as banner advertising. That's all it was. Everybody, you look like you're too young to even remember that time period. But at that time, it was all about banner ads. And it was all about getting placement on search engines like Yahoo. Google didn't even exist at that time, getting placements on search engines. And it was about spending money to generate attention. I saw something very, very different. I saw that marketing on the web was about creating great content, great websites, email newsletters. This was pre-social media, so we didn't have that option yet. Things like publishing your content as press releases over the press release wires. And this was a radical idea at the time. And so in my mind, I clearly saw something different. And I knew in my heart of hearts that this was the future of marketing. But no one else was talking about it. So how do I get this idea out there? And so I realized the best way to get this idea out there was to write a book about it, which I did. Started writing in about, I think it was late 2004, finished the manuscript in late 2006. Then the book was published in mid 2007. And I always remember that my publisher at that time, I've worked with several publishers since then, including Penguin Random House, but the publisher of that book, New Rules of Marketing and PR, is called Wiley. And when Wiley and I came to our agreement, they thought it was going to be what's called a mid-list book, which means it'll sell okay, worth us to publish, but it's not going to be a great book. And it went out the gate and sold like crazy. And I think we sold something like 100,000 copies in the first couple months. It hit a couple of the bestseller lists, and so far it's sold 450,000 copies in English, and it's in 29 other languages.
Is there an
But
audio? Is there an audio
and
version?
audio books and the whole thing. But the real key was that I was seeing something that maybe there were others who saw it, but nobody else was articulating. So I knew I had to get it out in the form of a book.
Wow. Okay. And before I jump into the healthcare piece, because that's really where I want to go with this, but looking back now, it's 2023. Happy New Year.
Thank you. Same to you.
Thank you. And do you feel the majority of marketing now does a good job? Do you think the majority of marketing now follows the tenets of your book? Or do you think that there's a lot of marketing that has crossed over into the new age of maybe digital ads and YouTube? And, because to me, even an ad before a YouTube video goes against what I read in your book. I don't want to see this. I can't wait until I skip that button. So why are people still doing that?
It's 15 years later, 16 years later, and most people are still paying for attention. So my book's title is The New Rules of Marketing and PR. The old rules are that you had to pay for attention. You had to pay for banner ads. You had to pay for a billboard by the side of the road. You had to pay to have a television commercial, a radio commercial. You had to pay to buy a list of email addresses to send your spam messages to. That was the old rules. The new rules are that you publish great content on the web. And now we have the ability to make a podcast like you're doing now, publish videos, be active on social media, have the ability to create a great website, all of these different ways to create content. But I still see the majority of organizations, even 15 years later, are still not focused as they should be on the power of being able to communicate through the web and through social media and through creating content. They're still insisting that they should be paying for attention. There's so few people today watch broadcast television, but there's still so many companies spending a ridiculous amount of money on advertising for broadcast television, just for one example,
Yeah. Well, I think probably once you start getting to the larger corporations, it's just they work in this robotic way where they've got a budget and they have to spend the budget. And the easiest way to spend the budget, that guy checked his box off. I did well because I spent the budget on the marketing. Did we do a marketing? We did a marketing.
Well, and then you can't measure it. Right. So it's like, oh yeah, we did our job, and it's not our fault that sales suck.
Right.
Well, yeah, it kind of is.
Right.
So it's broken for many organizations. It's broken for many industries.
Right.
But there's better ways.
Yeah.
And it really is something that organizations should be focused on if they want to do a good job.
Yeah. So let's jump into healthcare. I'm going to describe to you, I provide a service to groups of doctors and ACOs in healthcare. And I'm going to describe to you the challenge that I find with getting in front of these people.
Sure.
And perhaps you can help me. So there's two primary challenges. Primary challenge number one is that doctors very often are not business people. They weren't taught business in school. And the ones that are business people, you very often turn into unicorns, and they do something really, really cool. Right.
Right.
But the fact that doctors are typically not business people usually leads into problem number two, which is the main problem. And to me, that is the role, the decision-making role is typically, I find, split into three different roles at the company or the practice. Because the doctor's not a business person, they're going to have an admin who doesn't really care, but nothing's going to get to the doctor unless it gets to the admin, right? And in a large organization, maybe that's the operator, whatever it is. And then you've got the doctor, and then you've got the biller, and you've got all. And then the larger the organization, maybe you're supposed to be talking to the CEO, maybe it's the CFO, maybe it's the COO, maybe it's all of them, maybe now it's the chief of value-based care. So I feel like in healthcare, the role for the decision maker is split up between a bunch of people, and I find it very difficult to be able to pinpoint who that is, and then talk to them accordingly.
Interesting. So huge challenge, always as a challenge for many different industries, is who do you talk to? So the way that I like to look at this challenge is starting with something that I call buyer personas. And the idea of a buyer persona is to understand deeply the problems that people face that you might be able to help them to solve. And instead of an organization marketing based on what their product and service does, you then instead focus on how your organization can solve a problem of a buyer persona. So let me give a specific example. An example I think we can all relate to, and that's hotels.
Okay.
So if you look at a hotel website, you can kind of pick any hotel you want to, whether that's a big chain hotel like Hilton or Marriott or something like that, or even smaller boutique hotels. You can choose almost any hotel, and their websites look pretty similar, right? There's usually a pretty picture of a bedroom in the middle, a little description underneath, and maybe they have a widget for reserving the room. And it's kind of interchangeable between, just today I was looking at hotel websites in Palm Beach, Florida, because I have to go give a presentation in a couple of weeks. And, I went to the Hilton, I went to the Marriott and whatnot, and they look really similar. And that's the problem that so many people have with their marketing is they're marketing a product and they're focused in an egotistical way on the product they're selling. But if you think about it from the perspective of buyer personas, which to sort of sum up what a buyer persona is, it's a unique demographic group that you're trying to reach who has a unique problem. If you think about it from the buyer persona perspective, people who need to go to Palm Beach, there are a number of different buyer personas. Now, I'm not in the hotel business, but let's just take 5, for example. There's the independent business traveler who travels to the Palm Beach area, and they're making a decision on what hotel to stay in. That would be me in this case, choosing a hotel because I have a speaking gig there. Then there might be a corporate travel department in a company located in that part of Florida. That's a different buyer persona. They're buying hotel rooms for multiple people. Or how about an organization who's having a conference in the Palm Beach area, and they want to find a hotel to have the conference in the hotel ballroom and then have 300 rooms in the hotel for the people at the conference to sleep in. Very different buyer persona. How about a couple who wants to get married and they want to have a place to have their wedding reception? Or how about a family that wants to go to the Palm Beach, Florida area for vacation? Those are very distinct buyer personas. And the way that I would market is to a particular buyer persona based on the problems and challenges. So that would mean that if you're trying to attract people who want to have a wedding in Palm Beach, Florida, where your hotel is located, maybe you create a blog about weddings in Florida. And that is the way that you use to attract people. So that's just one example. But that's not what most organizations do. So, if I were you, you sort of phrase the question if looking at how to reach how healthcare organizations can reach, it's like, think about what are the buyer personas you're trying to reach? What are the challenges they face? What are the problems that you can solve for them? And then create the content accordingly that they can find, and then figure out ways that you can get it in front of them when they're looking for the content that you have.
Okay. Yeah. And I think something else that I'm taking away from what you're saying that may sound really elementary, but if I'm making this mistake, then other people are probably as well, is that don't think you only have one buyer persona. Like when
Absolutely
you said
right.
You got 5.
Absolutely right.
Because that's actually a struggle that now seems really stupid in retrospect. But like that's a struggle I've been going like, well, I can't lock it down to this one personality because it might be it might be the office admin. And what you're saying is, well, it's a pretty simple fix. You don't have one, you have five. So make 5 different streams of content that is going to attract each of the 5 different buyer personas.
Yeah, and then you can imagine every one of us, every single person listening into this, you and me, every one of us has had an experience where we land on a website or a social media feed, and you're like, oh my gosh, this is created just for me. You know that feeling.
Yeah.
And that's one reason why I have this grain surfboards here is I was going through a surfing magazine. I'm a huge surfer. I love it. I'm not very good at it, but I love it. I actually subscribe to a couple different surfing magazines. I was going through one of my surfing magazines, and there was an article about wooden surfboards. I'm like, wow, wooden surfboards, that's cool. Almost all surfboards have been made over the last 50 years out of styrofoam and that are then fiberglassed. Traditionally they were wood 100 years ago, but they've since in the last 50 years become fiberglass. So I thought there's this retro idea of wooden surfboards. So in my case, wow, wood is cool. It's interesting. It's prettier than fiberglass that's got some coloring on it. And I thought that's pretty neat. It's also green. Disposing of a fiberglass surfboard is horrible for the environment. Disposing from a wooden surfboard is just biodegradable. And I just thought, wow, that's kind of neat. So I went and I did a Google search for wooden surfboards. The number one search term result that came up was grain surfboards.
Not sponsored.
Beautiful website. Oh my God, they're located in York, Maine, 1 hour from me. And I felt like the website was talking directly to me. And it was because they were targeting people like me as their buyer persona. And in fact, I signed up within a couple hours of finding grain surfboards. I signed up for their Build a Wooden Surfboard class. And I went up to York, Maine for 4 days and built this surfboard. Wow. I ended up going up a couple of years later. I went up and I built another surfboard. The other one happens to be at my vacation house, which is near a surfing beach. So I actually ride that one. This one has just become a pretty prop in my home studio. But we've all had that experience, haven't
right.
we? Where you go to a website like these guys are talking directly to me. That's your challenge as a marketer, is how do you create a website that talks directly to a particular buyer persona? So I was talking just yesterday with a dentist. It's a dentist that has 2 different facilities located in Massachusetts. And I was having a conversation, I had a short conversation with the owner of this dental practice, but I also had a long conversation, about half a day, with the person in charge, who's basically the business manager and also in charge of marketing of the dental practice. Okay. And we started to talk about the different buyer personas of a dental practice. Because most of the time, again, just like the hotels I talked about earlier, most dental practices say, we have the qualifications you need. We graduated from a great school, and we are very careful. We have dentists that are very skilled, and we won't hurt you when you're in the chair. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but
we will talk to you while all the things are in your mouth.
Basically, just like hotel websites, most dental office websites are the same. So I said, let's talk about this concept of buyer personas, and we spent a couple hours talking about it. So we came up with, number one, people who are absolutely scared of the dental office and have not gone to a dentist for several years because they're so scared. That's a unique buyer persona. Then there's another group of people who are simply looking for a beautiful smile. Their whole thing is, cavities, whatever, fix them. I need a beautiful smile. Then you've got another buyer persona. This is a unique buyer persona, a parent of a child who needs to find a dentist. Very different need, because the person who's making the decision is not the one sitting in the dental chair. And we came up with several other buyer personas, but you get the idea.
Yeah.
Then if you have a unique page or several pages for each of those buyer personas, that it's way better than just saying, hey, we're a great dentist and we've got all these wonderful, wonderful dentists that can help you, with your teeth, which is what almost all of them do.
Yeah. All right. So what was the inspiration for Fanocracy?
So interesting. Fanocracy is a book that I wrote with my daughter. It came out in 2002, and it's about fandom culture and how you can use fandom culture as a fabulous way to market a business or a company or an idea or yourself. And what happened was I was talking to my daughter, Reiko. She's now 29 years old. She's an emergency doctor at Boston Medical Center. But at the time that we started to think about this idea of Fanocracy, she was in medical school. And we were talking about a couple of different things, again, patterns in the universe. A couple of patterns in the universe we were noticing. One pattern was that the online world, especially social media and especially Facebook and YouTube, have gotten increasingly polarized. Facebook, and especially Facebook and YouTube, rewards negativity and conspiracy theories and groups people into groups that then become angry at other people. And I think have been responsible for lots of negative things over the past 4 or 5 years. Things like the rise of the anti-vaccination movement, just as one example, or the polarization between the Republicans, I call them the red team, and the Democrats, I call them the blue team, the red team versus the blue team. And it's become a very toxic place. And so we were seeing that trend. The other trend we were seeing is that people were searching for true humanity in the people that they do business with, in the organizations they do business with. Getting sick of the idea that you call a phone number of a company and you get thrown into some phone tree hell with recorded messages, or you go to a website, you try to learn something, and you get hit with a robot that you want to that asks you to answer the questions, and he never answers the questions right, or you email a company, you don't get a response. I mean, all this kind of stuff. We were looking for true humanity. At the same time, I'm a huge fan of surfing, as I just mentioned. My daughter Reiko is a huge fan of Korean pop music, K-pop. And so we realized that in one way we're really different. I'm a middle-aged white man. She's a half Japanese, Asian, half Asian woman, medical doctor. And we're utterly different in that way. But we had the same ideas around this idea of fandom. So we spent a couple of years researching how and why people become fans of something. We dug deep into the neuroscience, what's going on in our brain when we become a fan of something. And it turns out what's going on is all humans have a deep-seated need to want to be part of a tribe, a community of like-minded people. That's why we all have that. So I'm deep into the community of surfers. That's where I feel safe and comfortable. We all have that kind of need. And so imagine if you can build a community, if you can build a tribe of like-minded people around the business that you're running. And in fact, it's totally possible. And that's what we wrote our book about, ways that you can build fans of a business. And it was a super fun book to write. And of course, I wrote it with my daughter, which was great. We have 2 different points of view. Some backstory on the book. The first time that we took a stab at writing the manuscript, we were writing it in one voice, a unified voice between her voice and my voice. And it wasn't working because it was kind of like taking 2 different things and putting them together, and it was 1 + 1 = less than 1.
Okay.
So we ended up actually instead writing who wrote each chapter. So chapter 1 by David, chapter 2 by Reiko, chapter 3 by David, chapter 4 by Reiko. And it was way better because her voice really strong came out, my voice really strong came out. And that was a great way to do the book. So, and it's done really well. It's a Wall Street Journal bestseller. And people really like the idea of how they can grow fans of their business.
Yeah, it's really interesting because as you're talking, I'm thinking like, all right, let me hit him with a really extreme example that there's no way to build fans around. And as I'm thinking that, I'm thinking through like YouTube shorts that I see of literally, I mean, the most extreme example I could think of is a guy who's blown up and he empties out sewers. What are they called? The private sewers?
Septic systems.
Yeah, septic tanks. That's what he does. And he's built this, and he takes videos about it and he talks about it and this and the other. And he's built like this whole kind of fan club about it. And then I thought, well, does that actually translate to sales?
Damn right it does.
I'm interested. What?
Damn right it does.
Yeah. And then I was thinking like, well, just because because my original thought was, all right, well, I only care about seeing him go empty out septic tanks. But the truth is, if I'm anywhere near the guy's area and I have a septic tank, even if I'm not interested in septic tanks, but who's the first person I'm going to call? The guy that I see him all the time, right?
Absolutely. And if someone were to say to you, oh my gosh, my septic tank it's backing up, I don't know what to do, he'd say, I got someone and you should call. So one of our favorite examples is we found an auto insurance company.
Okay.
Now, I when I do my presentations, I often will ask, please raise your hand if you're a fan of your auto insurance company, and no hands go up.
Really? Not with the Geico ads?
And so this company is called Hagerty Insurance. Okay. They specialize in classic car auto insurance. Okay. And what they do exactly what I've been talking about. They focus on buyer personas. They create great content. They've got a YouTube channel with well over 1 million subscribers. Can you imagine in a business everyone hates? They have a database of the prices of classic cars that you can use to look up. They go to classic car auto shows, and they're there as part of the community, mingling with people, providing advice. They do a fabulous job. They're called Hagerty Insurance. I had an opportunity to interview McKeel Hagerty, the CEO of the company, and that's one of the stories in our book, Fanocracy. And he said, David, I specifically went out to build fans of my business. That's what I did because I recognized I couldn't try to build my business the way every other insurance company does. I don't want to spend more money on ads than everybody else. I don't want to lower my prices to become the cheapest provider. So I went out to build fans, and it was all focused on a human relationship with fans. It was focused on creating great content for those fans. It was focused on the buyer persona of someone who loves classic cars is a really different buyer persona than just general auto insurance. And now they're the #1 provider of classic car auto insurance in the entire world. And they went public last year on the New York Stock Exchange. So doing fabulously well. And it's just like your septic system guy. It's a business everyone hates because nobody likes auto insurance. Yet they've got millions of fans.
It's almost like I'm hearing you say, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's almost like I'm hearing you say, it's a bit of a mind shift. Instead of trying to find content and create content that's going to support your service, go out and figure out what your customers are interested in, create that content. And in a sense, your service is almost going to support the content versus the other way around.
That's a good way of looking at it, but in one regard, you do need to focus on the idea that the content you create needs to be related to what you're doing. So in the case of Hagerty Insurance, their YouTube channel focuses on things that classic car lovers can enjoy, and then can either be educational, I'm just going to make something up, how to change an oil filter in a 1968 Camaro, whatever, something like that. But then they also have a series called Barn Finds. And that's when somebody finds a really cool classic car that's been sitting in a barn for 50 years, super dusty and all that. It's kind of like Antiques Roadshow, if you know that show. And so they're doing a great job with that. So that's one way to build fans. But I want to share one more way to build fans. And a lot of this came from Reiko, my co-author, my daughter, in the book Fanocracy. And we found the most surprising thing as we did our research is the importance of passion, of the passions that people bring to their work. And surprisingly, the importance of what the passion they have outside of work is, bringing that to their work. Because, as I said earlier, what we learned is that people want to do business with people as humans. We want to have that human relationship. We hate it when we're dealing with a company and it feels like you're just a number and no one cares about you. And you call the number and you get thrown into phone tree hell, and you email them, they don't email you back. The contrast that with a true human relationship with an organization. And part of that comes from the idea that when you get to know a little bit about somebody on a human level, you can relate to them more. One reason why I'm talking about grain surfboards and the fact that I love to to surf is that it helps to humanize me. And so we found that to be something huge. Very, very, very few healthcare providers will let part of their personality shine through. So I'll give you two examples. Okay. The first example is a dentist. His name is Dr. John Marashi. I met Dr. Marashi at a Tony Robbins event I spoke at. He's a dentist in Southern California. He came up to me after my talk and said, "David, I'm a dentist. I don't have fans. What are you talking about here?
I'm a necessary evil."
Yeah. I mean, people come to me because they have to, not because they're a fan of what I do. And I said, "Well, what do you love to do, Dr. Marashi?" I call him John now because we actually become friends. And he goes, "David, I love to skateboard. If I wasn't a dentist, I want to be a professional skateboarder." I go, "Well, cool. Why don't you share your love of skateboarding with your dental practice?" So he did that. On his wall in the practice itself, he has skateboards. He sometimes skateboards from one examination room to another. Now, I want to emphasize he's not on a skateboard when he does the work, but he will sometimes skateboard from
like
one
the Seinfeld dentist,
No, he doesn't do that. But he does sometimes skateboard from one examination room to another. He has on his website, he has pictures of him skateboarding. He has an Instagram. Last time I checked, I think he's approaching 30,000 followers.
Wow.
And some of the images are of him skateboarding. And he told me very specifically, because he did the measurements, he did the work to find out that just by talking about skateboarding, which humanizes him with his patients, he grew his practice revenue by 23%.
Wow.
23% just by humanizing.
Over how long?
That was over a year.
Wow.
One more example. I mentioned that my co-author and daughter, Reiko, who I wrote Fanocracy with, is an emergency doctor at Boston Medical Center. She says she had told me that during the height of the pandemic, they wore PPE, personal protective equipment, from head to toe. They had a mask and a second mask and a shield, and their eyes were almost all covered, and something on the hair, and when they walked into the emergency room, they looked like an alien, a robot or something. And she said people were already scared to be in the emergency department, but yet here comes a doctor who does not look like a human.
Right.
So what she said was she helped to lead a group of people that started to wear things to humanize themselves. So they started out by having pins. So my daughter had on a Black Lives Matter pin, a rainbow pin. She had a Boston Bruins pin. Then they wore masks of their favorite sports team, Boston Bruins or whatever. Then they made sweatshirts that they could wear as the outside part of the clothing that she had on, which was co-branded with one of the Boston sports teams and Boston Medical Center. So Bruins or Celtics or Boston Red Sox or the Patriots or whatever. And she said that the difference was like night and day. When you walk into an examination room and there's someone who's scared and they need an emergency doctor quickly, and they see an alien come in and all they can see that's human is the eyes, they get scared. But they see someone walk in who's wearing a Boston Bruins Boston Medical Center sweatshirt, and they light up. They're like, oh, wow, you're a fan of the Bruins. Oh, cool. And it made a huge difference. So it's the idea of humanizing ourselves. It's the idea of passion. It's the idea of sharing a little bit about what you like to do in your private life helps a lot to build fans of a business.
Incredible. David, a year in the making. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. I definitely have my work cut out for me. And yeah, I suggest everybody go out there. And if you haven't seen if you haven't read the New Rules of Marketing PR, definitely grab that. Fanocracy after that. Follow David on LinkedIn and Twitter and wherever else. There will be links all around over here. I'm sure there's a website.
There is, for me, it's my full name, David Meerman Scott. And then we've also got a website for the book Fanocracy, just www.fanocracy.com. I hope it was worth waiting a year to get me on. I'm glad you've kept the podcast up so we can make this happen.
Thank you so much, David.
My pleasure. Thanks, Mendo.
Before you run, two things. First of all, just a reminder to keep the window open.
I will do that.
I got 60 seconds. Do you know Scott Adams well enough to connect me with him?
Scott Adams? Which Scott Adams?
Scott Adams from Dilbert.
I do not.
Okay. All right. That guy, I have a patient program. His whole lens is like your lens is marketing. His lens is persuasion and using persuasion. Yes. And I'd love to collaborate with him to figure out how to persuade patients to better their health instead of, because right now the thing is the doctors, whatever, whole nother thing. But anyway.
Nice. I mean, usually, have you checked his website often?
I've actually gotten in touch with him. I emailed him a million times and he finally got back to me and said, I don't collaborate with people. And I was like, screw you, man. You're not that cool. Okay. You're just an author. You're successful, but But anyways, it's nice to see you, and I appreciate you spending the time. Do you want me to send you the whole raw clip, or just tag you on? I
don't need the clip, but just let me know when you put it out.
I will. Thanks, David.
Okay.
Appreciate you. Cheers.
Cool. Take care.